Dionysus, having survived his childhood, discovered grapes and how to turn the juice into wine. Legend holds that Dionysus was the first ever to turn grapes into wine.
Dionysus was called Lysios, the loosener. Lysis means loosening, setting free, deliverance, dissolution, collapse, breaking bonds and laws, and the final unraveling as of a plot in tragedy. James Hillman, Mythical Figures, page 29.
The stark differences between Apollo and Dionysus, two of the most intriguing figures in Greek mythology, illuminate the richness and complexity of the human experience. Apollo represents reason, enlightenment, and the pursuit of art and knowledge, while Dionysus embodies ecstasy, revelry, and emotional liberation. These contrasting attributes have left indelible marks on art, culture, and philosophy throughout history. In the end, the interplay between these two gods reflects the duality of the human spirit, where reason and emotion, discipline and chaos, coexist in a delicate dance that defines the human condition.
Nietzsche sees two forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. One is measured, balanced, rational, imbued with reason and self-restraint. The other is dark, visceral, wild, untamed, hard to understand, emerging from the inner layers of ourselves.
An intricate pantheon of Greek gods, two figures emerge as polar opposites, both captivating in their own unique ways. Apollo, the god of light, music, and reason, and Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and madness, stand at the center of contrasting domains. In this intriguing journey, we delve into the distinct characteristics that define these two Greek gods and explore the enigmatic differences that set them apart.
In the birth of tragedy Apollo and Dionysus, whatever character each of them possesses in other contexts and different bodies of law, are defined as opposing forces. Dionysus is a god of nature, associated with forces biological and violent, orgiastic mysteries, with everything that refuses to be civilized. Apollo is the god of civilization. If he were linguistic, he would be the perfectly formed sentence, self-possessed in its transparency. Ancient Greek culture represented a balance of the two, until the influence of Socrates on Euripides gave a larger share to the Apollonian and disrupted the Dionysian, causing the successive rise of rationalism. It is equivalent to disrupting the natural chemistry of your body by the injection of hormones. The Apollonian without the Dionysian is, as the Chinese would say, yang without yin. Nietzsche called Dionysus creatively destructive and destructively creative.
Difference 1. Parentage and birth. Apollo, son of Zeus and Leto. Apollo, born to the mighty Zeus and the Titan Leto, is a direct descendant of the Olympian gods. His lineage is a testament to his divine heritage and the esteemed company he keeps. Dionysus, son of Zeus and Semele. Dionysus, on the other hand, is also a son of Zeus, but his mother is Semele, a mortal princess. This dual parentage introduces an intriguing blend of mortal and divine elements into his character. Nuance. Apollo's lineage is purely divine, while Dionysus has both mortal and divine parentage. Difference 2. Domains and spheres of influence. Apollo, the god of light and reason. Apollo's dominion encompasses light, music, poetry, and reason. He embodies the essence of rationality, enlightenment, and artistic expression. Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. Dionysus, in stark contrast, is the god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy. His domain is steeped in emotions, hedonism, and the irrational. Nuance. Apollo represents reason and art, while Dionysus embodies emotion and intoxication. Difference 3. Personality and temperament. Apollo, rational and disciplined. Apollo is often portrayed as rational, disciplined, and unyielding. His demeanor is marked by a sense of order and control. Dionysus, wild and unpredictable. Dionysus, in contrast, is characterized by wildness, unpredictability, and an inclination towards chaos. He revels in the unpredictable aspects of life. Nuance. Apollo personifies discipline, while Dionysus revels in chaos. Difference 4. Symbols and attributes. Apollo, the lyre and the sun chariot. Apollo's symbols include the lyre, representing music and poetry, and the sun chariot, signifying his association with the sun and light. Dionysus, the grapevine and the thyrsus. Dionysus is often depicted with symbols such as the grapevine, symbolizing wine, and the thyrsus, a staff entwined with ivy leaves and topped with a pine cone, representing ecstasy and revelry. Nuance. Apollo's symbols relate to art and light, while Dionysus's symbols are linked to wine and ecstasy.
Difference 5. Worship and rituals. Apollo, formal worship and prophecies. Worship of Apollo involves formal rituals and oracles, where priests and priestesses convey his prophecies. His temples are centers of knowledge and divination. Dionysus, Dionysian festivals and revelry. Dionysian worship is marked by festivals and celebrations, including the famous Bacchanalia. His devotees engage in revelry, ecstatic dances, and indulgence. Nuance. Apollo's worship is formal and prophetic, while Dionysus's worship is exuberant and hedonistic. Apollo, heroic patron and protector. Apollo often plays the role of a heroic patron, supporting and guiding heroes on their quests. He is a protector of cities and upholds moral values. Dionysus, catalyst of transformation. Dionysus is a catalyst for transformation and change. His myths frequently involve personal and societal upheaval, leading to personal growth and revelation. Nuance. Apollo supports heroes and upholds moral values, while Dionysus inspires transformation. Difference 7. Favored mortals. Apollo, poets and musicians. Apollo favors poets, musicians, and artists. He inspires creative expression and artistic endeavors among mortals. Dionysus, winegrowers and performers. Dionysus's favor extends to wine-growers, vintners, and performers who participate in ecstatic rituals and celebrations. Nuance. Apollo inspires artists, while Dionysus embraces revelers and performers. Difference 8. Relationship with mortals. Apollo, mentorship and guidance. Apollo often takes on a mentorship role with mortals, providing guidance and wisdom. He is a source of inspiration for poets and musicians. Dionysus, liberating and transformative influence. Dionysus's influence on mortals is liberating and transformative, often leading to moments of ecstasy and personal liberation. Nuance. Apollo provides guidance, while Dionysus offers liberation and transformation. Difference 9. Gender roles and expression. Apollo, masculine and rational. Apollo's persona is often associated with traditional masculine traits, emphasizing reason and intellect. Dionysus, fluid and emotional. Dionysus represents a more fluid and emotional aspect, allowing for a wider range of gender expression and experiences. Nuance. Apollo embodies traditional masculinity, while Dionysus embodies emotional fluidity. Difference 10. Cult of personality. Apollo, Delphi and Pythia. The most famous center of Apollo's worship is at Delphi, where the Oracle of Delphi, also known as Pythia, delivered prophecies in his name. Dionysus, mystery cults and initiation. Dionysus's worship often involves mystery cults and initiation rituals, where devotees undergo transformative experiences. Nuance: Apollo's worship centers around oracles, while Dionysus's worship involves mystery cults. Difference 11. Tragedy and comedy. Apollo, tragedy and high art. Apollo's influence is associated with tragedy and high art, often inspiring works that explore profound human suffering and conflict. Dionysus, comedy and satire. Dionysus's presence leans towards comedy and satire, encouraging lighter and more irreverent forms of artistic expression. Nuance: Apollo inspires tragedy, while Dionysus encourages comedy.
Difference 12. Role in the pantheon.
Apollo, a major Olympian deity. Apollo is considered one of the 12 major Olympian deities, holding a prominent place in the Greek pantheon. Dionysus, a later addition. Dionysus, although a significant god, was not one of the original 12 Olympians and was later added to the pantheon. Nuance: Apollo is an original Olympian, while Dionysus is a later addition.
Difference 13.
Impact on philosophy. Apollo, rational philosophy. Apollo's association with reason and enlightenment has influenced the development of rational philosophies. Dionysus, existential philosophy. Dionysus's domain of emotions and irrationality has contributed to the development of existential and more introspective philosophies. Nuance: Apollo's influence is rational, while Dionysus's influence is existential and introspective. Difference 14. Approach to death and the afterlife. Apollo, Elysium and heroic afterlife. Apollo's followers often believed in the concept of Elysium, a paradise for the virtuous and heroic in the afterlife. He is associated with a more traditional and heroic view of death. Dionysus, transcendence and renewal. Dionysus offers a more transformative perspective on death and the afterlife. His followers see it as a process of transcendence and renewal, embracing change and transformation. Nuance: Apollo's view of the afterlife is heroic, while Dionysus's view is transformative. Difference 15. Contemporary influence. Apollo, rationalism and enlightenment. Apollo's influence can be seen in contemporary rationalism and the pursuit of knowledge and enlightenment. Dionysus, counterculture and liberation movements. Dionysus's influence resonates in counterculture movements and liberation ideals that challenge societal norms. Nuance: Apollo's influence is linked to rationalism, while Dionysus's influence is tied to countercultural and liberating movements.
And we do see some similarities between Dionysus and Jesus. And remember that when the Gospel of John came out, the Dionysus worship cult was very much alive and around. It was very much alive and around during St. Paul and his missionary journeys. They were very much aware of the cult of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. And it was no mistake that when the Gospel of John came out in the mid or late 90s, that the story of the wedding in Canaan, where Jesus turned the water into wine. Some people say that Christianity is a copycat religion. Definitely was reminiscent to all the people living at that time that this is a show-up with the god of the wine, Dionysus, the party god, the god of ecstasy. And remember, Jesus equates himself not as John the Baptist and his disciples, who came neither eating nor drinking, but Jesus and his disciples both came eating and drinking, and you say he's Beelzebub, the devil himself, not just demonized, but the devil himself. All because he's eating and drinking. He is the party god like Dionysus, is the implication of turning the water into wine.
In the birth of tragedy Apollo and Dionysus, whatever character each of them possesses in other contexts and different bodies of law, are defined as opposing forces. Dionysus is a god of nature, associated with forces biological and violent, orgiastic mysteries, with everything that refuses to be civilized. Apollo is the god of civilization. If he were linguistic, he would be the perfectly formed sentence, self-possessed in its transparency. Dionysus wants not to possess himself but to lose himself in an ecstasy in which he and nature are one and the same. The methods of ecstasy are intoxication, sexuality, the Dionysiac music and dance, the dithyramb in which the barrier between man and nature are overwhelmed. As he appears in the Bacchae, Dionysus is wild, god of maddened group, people who drive themselves out of civilization by wine, drugs, dismemberment. Modern versions of the Dionysiac include the forces active in bullfights, cockfights, rock concerts, wrestling, charismatic revival meetings. In Nietzsche, tragedy is the form in which Dionysus and Apollo are reconciled. The Dionysiac music, by itself, would be unbearable, because it would defeat culture and shatter the necessary limits implied in character and individuality. The Apolline hero is a hero because he takes upon himself the Dionysiac experience and, not at all transcending it, incorporates it in himself, reconstituting his experience now as form and beauty. The Greeks allowed for an Apolline incorporation of Dionysus, and did not try to suppress him. The delight in drunkenness, delight in cunning, in revenge, in envy, in slander, in obscenity, in everything which was recognized by the Greeks as human and therefore built into the structure of society and custom. The wisdom of their institutions lies in the absence of any gulf between good and evil, black and white. Nature, as it reveals itself, is not denied but only ordered, limited to specified days and religious cults. That is not the root of all spiritual freedom in the ancient world. The ancients sought a moderate release of natural forces, not their destruction and denial. We are not supposed to hanker after an aboriginal state of union with nature, as if culture had never happened. Drink and drugs are deemed to be harmful for many reasons, but mainly because they remove the cultural distinction between a man and the nature from which he has been rescued. Apollo must win. Each society recognizes that there are Dionysiac forces at large, and it makes some provision for them. Public entertainments, sports, including blood sports, motor racing, and sporadic limited wars are provided, as far as possible under controlled conditions. If we continue extending the definition of culture so that it covers virtually the whole of experience, leaving nothing to nature, we will make it impossible for ourselves to understand violence and obscenity except as failures of the system. It would be wise to regard culture as a partial and improbable transformation of natural impulse rather than a comfortable norm. That way, manifestations of violence could be considered without the normal accompaniment of shock, horror, and insult. Dennis Donahue, The Arts Without Mystery, pages 83-5. Dionysian mysteries were a ritual of ancient Greece and Rome which used intoxicants and other trance-inducing techniques, like dance and music, to remove inhibitions and social constraints, liberating the individual to return to a natural state. It also provided some liberation for those marginalized by Greek society: women, slaves, homosexuals and foreigners. Dionysian mysteries. Dionysus was called Lysios, the Loosener. Lysis means loosening, setting free, deliverance, dissolution, collapse, breaking bonds and laws, and the final unraveling as of a plot in tragedy. James Hillman, Mythical Figures, page 29. Nietzsche sees two forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. One is measured, balanced, rational, imbued with reason and self-restraint. The other is dark, visceral, wild, untamed, hard to understand, emerging from the inner layers of ourselves. Ancient Greek culture represented a balance of the two, until the influence of Socrates on Euripides gave a larger share to the Apollonian and disrupted the Dionysian, causing the successive rise of rationalism. It is equivalent to disrupting the natural chemistry of your body by the injection of hormones. The Apollonian without the Dionysian is, as the Chinese would say, yang without yin. Nietzsche called Dionysus creatively destructive and destructively creative. Nietzsche understood something that I did not find explicitly stated in his work, that growth in knowledge, or in anything, cannot proceed without the Dionysian. It reveals matters that we can select at some point, given that we have optionality. In other words, it can be the source of stochastic tinkering, and the Apollonian can be part of the rationality in the selection process. What Nietzsche really meant, the Apollonian and Dionysian. One god stands for order, logic, and reason. The other stands for chaos, madness, and drunkenness. Nietzsche thinks you need both. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche framed the Greek gods Apollo and Dionysus as emblems of two fundamental forces of human nature. In general, Apollo represents forces related to order and logic, while Dionysus is related to chaos and irrationality. The Apollonian and Dionysian dichotomy remains a useful way to view art, psychology, and society. Scotty Hendricks. We all know the kind of person who likes to impose order on every situation. They favor reason, logic, and precise definitions, while they despise chaos. Likewise, we all know people who throw order to the wind, follow every impulse they have, are drawn to chaos, and hate restraints. While most of us would look at these kinds of people and see nothing more than personality differences, Friedrich Nietzsche saw an enduring dichotomy inside all of us which emerges from nature itself and can be applied to art, psychology, ethics, and politics. The Apollonian and Dionysian. In his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche examines art, particularly ancient Greek plays. While he didn't write the last word on the subject, he did use the book to introduce a concept that continued to appear in his writings long after he dismissed his early work as badly written, ponderous, embarrassing, image-mad and image-confused. The two forces of nature he introduces show up everywhere. While their most famous iteration was as pillars of Greek culture, they can also appear as drives within us and even as historical forces. He names the two halves of this dichotomy the Apollonian and the Dionysian, after two Greek gods. Apollo, the god of the sun, truth, light, and logic, is the namesake for the first, ordered, half. This is the half that covers everything which is structured. Sculpture, and art which is pure form, is the most Apollonian art. Rational thinking, which is based on logical structures, is also Apollonian. Since this drive tends to put things into their place, it also tends to individualize and distinctly separate people and ideas from one another. Nietzsche thinks dreams are the most Apollonian state we can experience. He bases this on the idea that we understand what we see when dreaming isn't real, but merely an image. It has been suggested that he was a lucid dreamer to explain this strange notion. Dionysus, the god of wine, festivals, and madness, lends his name to the later, frenzied, half. Music is the pure Dionysian art form since it doesn't appeal to our rational mind but rather to our emotions. The Dionysian doesn't categorize and tends to blur the boundaries between the self and nature. The esoteric and mystic cults of the Greeks, many of which were dedicated to Dionysus, offer an alternative to the rationalism of the Apollonian and were noted for their sexual licentiousness. Drunkenness is suggested as the pure Dionysian state. He gives us a fantastic description of the Dionysian when he explains, "Transform Beethoven's Hymn to Joy into a painting. Let your imagination conceive the multitudes bowing to the dust, awestruck, then you will approach the Dionysian." Nietzsche suggests that folk music is especially Dionysian and that it might also be historically demonstrable that every period rich in folk songs has been most violently stirred by Dionysian currents. This explains a lot about the 1960s. Two men ride home after the Woodstock Music Festival. 3 days of music, free love, and drugs that dissolve the boundaries between self and the cosmos. A more Dionysian event is hard to come by. How can these drives ever be combined? Getting these two drives to work together is difficult, but not impossible. Nietzsche saw their fusion as ideal, as it allowed the tremendous frenzied energy of the Dionysian to be applied constructively inside an Apollonian framework. He thought the ancient Greeks, perhaps uniquely, were able to blend the two drives in their culture. In Greek tragedies like Oedipus Rex, dreadful concepts like death, fate, and unfairness were expressed in a beautiful and ordered way through plots and dialogue. The audience viewed these concepts in a Dionysian way since they were watching an unrelatable main character experience them as explained by the chorus. The chorus unity and detachment from the action helps the audience to separate from themselves and consider the ideas in the play in a depersonalized way. This allows the viewer to deal with unpleasant ideas in a way that is gentler than frank, Apollonian discussion. The ability of Greece to fuse the two ideas didn't last forever though. Eventually, the Greeks drifted towards the Apollonian again, to Nietzsche's disappointment. It's not bad at all, but Nietzsche knew that we need both. The loss of the Dionysian in drama and society is, therefore, a loss to our own ability to be complete people, let alone the effect it has on plays. Even if you're not a playwright or a classical scholar trying to make sense of Greek civilization, these concepts can still be of use. We all have both an Apollonian and Dionysian side to us. While many thinkers have downplayed the Dionysian and sought to promote only the rational, structured parts of us, Nietzsche thinks this isn't just folly but detrimental. He mocks those who try and avoid the Dionysian, saying they turn away from such phenomena as from folk diseases, with contempt or pity born of the consciousness of their own healthy-mindedness. But of course such poor wretches have no idea how corpse-like and ghostly their so-called healthy-mindedness looks when the glowing life of the Dionysian revelers roars past them. But this doesn't mean that you should utterly give in to the drunkenness, madness, sexual licentiousness, and boundless chaos of the Dionysian. Instead, it means that you should accept that part of you wants those things and strive to harness that energy towards a more constructive goal. Ruth Benedict has used the dichotomy to describe different cultures in her anthropological work. Camille Paglia wrote a controversial book suggesting men and women embody the archetypes and that there is a biological cause of this. Freud, whose ideas covered similar ground as Nietzsche's, described the idea in Dionysian terms. While Nietzsche later dismissed his first book, the ideas he put forward in it are still of great interest. His understanding that we all have forces of reason, irrationality, structure, chaos, individualism, and cosmic unity within us all would later inform his psychological insights. Although his theories on aesthetics might not have been the end-all answer he was looking for, the Apollonian and Dionysian dichotomy remains a useful way to view art, psychology, and society. The Apollonian and the Dionysian are key terms in Nietzsche's philosophy of aesthetics, referring to two opposing tensions within art. Nietzsche's philosophy and the birth of tragedy. The Birth of Tragedy was Nietzsche's first and arguably most accessible book. It resulted from some lectures he delivered back when he taught classical philology at the University of Basel. Nietzsche decided to publish his ideas after encouraging feedback from Richard Wagner and his wife, Cosima. The first few copies were released in 1871 under the title Socrates and Greek Tragedy. In 1872, it was properly published and distributed under the title The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music. Of course, the older Nietzsche would regret all of this. In 1886, the revised edition of The Birth of Tragedy included a section called An Attempt at Self-Criticism written in 1770-1. In short, it is an essay on aesthetics. Right from the beginning, we learn that one of the book's main premises is that only as an aesthetic phenomenon is an existence and a world eternally justified, page 50. Nietzschean philosophy traditionally sees existence as pain and chaos. Only art can make this pain bearable, and Nietzsche finds that there are two artistic paths within art, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. After exploring them thoroughly, he concludes that the Greek tragedy was the only point in history when these two opposing tensions were brought together. However, he also claims that his contemporary German music is on its way to reviving the Apollonian-Dionysian union through the operas of Richard Wagner, but this is a topic for another discussion. Dreams and Apollo in Nietzsche's philosophy. The Apollonian and the Dionysian arise from two fundamental perceptions of the world, which we will call art worlds. The first art world is the dream world. The dream world is related to the experience of dreaming. For Nietzsche's philosophy, the dream world is one of a cheerful acquiescence. Our dreams are filled with illusions. However, the very fabric of these illusions draws us in, to the point where, sometimes, we attempt to keep dreaming even if we understand that we are in a dream. Think lucid dreaming. Dreams are, by their very nature, structured experiences, and this structure allows for distinctions to be made. One of these distinctions is that of the self and the other, the subject and the object. The Greeks embodied the sphere of dreams in their god Apollo. Apollo is the god of prophecy, light, and music. He is the son of Zeus and Leto and the twin brother of Artemis. Apollo is a god who offers protection and speaks through his oracle at Delphi, providing guidance to those who seek it. For Nietzsche, Apollo is a deity related to calmness and reason. Drunkenness and Dionysus. Drunkenness, or intoxication, is a whole different experience, but, like the world of dreams, it is an experience based on illusions or misrepresentations of reality. Drunken reality is instinctive. Unlike the structured, ordered illusion of the dream, drunkenness is deeply emotional and irrational. Within this chaotic reality, the subject is dissolved, becoming one with its surroundings. As a result, drunkenness is an experience of oneness, or as Nietzsche calls it, primordial unity. Dionysus is the god who embodies this type of experience. Bacchus or Dionysus, by Caravaggio, via Uffizi Galleries. Dionysus was the son of Zeus and Semele. He was the god of wine, fertility, ritual, creative madness, and tragedy. Unlike Apollo, he was not part of the Olympian gods from the beginning. Dionysus is an Eastern deity whose cult spread from the East, and his cult was firmly connected with these Eastern origins. Nietzsche's philosophy presents Dionysus as a god who brings divine madness and ecstatic unity. Apollo and Dionysus are both brothers, from Zeus, and gods of music. However, the forms of music they represent are different, and by extension, as we saw, the art worlds they inspire couldn't be more different. The music of Apollo was Doric architectonics in tones, but in merely suggested tones, such as those of the kithara, guitar. The very element which forms the essence of Dionysian music, and hence of music in general, is carefully excluded as un-Apollonian, namely, the thrilling power of the tone, the uniform stream of the mellows, and the thoroughly incomparable world of harmony. Apollonian and Dionysian Principles. Apollo and Dionysus, by Leonid Ilyukin. The Apollonian is the art of light and calm reason. It is also the art that, through its structure, takes the subject out of its context, away from its community. It naturally raises walls between the subject and the other. Nietzsche calls this the principle of individuation or the principium individuationis, a key quality of the Apollonian. He also claims that sculpture is the most Apollonian art, because of its structured nature. On the other hand, the Dionysian is the art of madness, emotion, ecstasy, and above all, unity. The Dionysian is a force that unites humans as well as humans and nature. Within a Dionysian state of ecstasy, there are no lines. Everything becomes one under the experience of primordial unity. The principium individuationis here is dissolved and the communion between different subjects is realized. The emotional character of the Dionysian is better manifested through music. For Nietzsche's philosophy, the fundamental state of the world is one of chaos. Humanity is alone, facing the whims of fate, the forces of nature, and its own helplessness. According to Nietzsche, this truth is perfectly expressed by the Greek anecdote known as the terrible wisdom of god Silenus. According to a Greek myth, when King Midas captured Silenus, he asked him what the best thing humans could go after was. Silenus refused to answer, but Midas persisted. In the end, the god replied, "Ephemeral offspring of a travailing genius and of harsh fortune, why do you force me to speak what it were better for you men not to know? For a life spent in ignorance of one's own woes is most free from grief. But for men, it is utterly impossible that they should obtain the best thing of all, or even have any share in its nature, for the best thing for all men and women is not to be born. However, the next best thing to this, and the first of those to which man can attain, but nevertheless only the second best, is, after being born, to die as quickly as possible. But if existence is so unbearable, how can humans cope? The first thing that the Greeks did, says Nietzsche, was to create gods. They deified everything around them, natural or not, good or bad. The Greek gods had human traits. They were just as moral as they were immoral. They went after virtue as much as they sinned. The fact that the gods lived the same lives as humans affirmed the lives of the mortals. Among these gods was Apollo, and he was the source of rationality and attraction to beauty which made life worth living. Within the world of Apollo, the wisdom of Silenus was reversed. The worst of all was to die before getting the chance to live. Those caught in the Apollonian dream could not hear the screams and the anguish that consumed everything outside the light, an image that Nietzsche believed was perfectly captured by Raphael in his Transfiguration. The light of civilization had triumphed and it seemed as if the barbaric had been beaten. And then came Dionysus, the cult of whom spread from the east. Like wildfire, the madness of the wine god brought with it a glimpse of the world that lies outside the Apollonian and a new solution that promised to reconcile man with nature in a mystical primordial unity. The two forces fought each other until something spectacular happened. They recognized the existence of each other, and lo! Apollo could not live without Dionysus. Page 41. The one began carrying traces of the other, and through their struggle, a new form of art emerged. Theater is an ancient Greek invention. This much is known. However, not everyone knows that theater evolved out of the dithyramb, a ritual hymn including dancing, in honor of Dionysus. Thespis was the first person in history to step out of the dithyramb's singularity. He began speaking in verse as an individual and representing a certain character. This was the birth of tragedy. Due to this special origin story, the ancient Greek tragedy was always a combination of epic and lyric poetry. Individual actors played a role but also interacted with the chorus, a group of performers singing in one voice thought to represent the average spectator. In the Dithyramb, Nietzsche's philosophy saw a purely Dionysian endeavor. Thespis stepping out of the Dithyramb to embody a certain character was a process of individuation and, as a result, an Apollonian intrusion. Consequently, the Greek tragedy was born out of the fusion or rather the dialectic synthesis of the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The chorus for Peter Hall's 2002 Bakshai, via Google Arts and Culture. Nietzsche further traced the Apollonian part in the protagonist and the way they sought to reason with their existential angst and make sense of reality. The Dionysian was found in the chorus and the chaotic nature of things through which the protagonist had to move, as well as the very concept of fate or moira, which no one could escape. Also, whereas the protagonist would always be transformed by the end of the play, the chorus always remained the same, representing the audience's common fears, hopes, and aspirations. Nietzsche believed that this function of the chorus created an impenetrable wall, shielding the audience from reality and allowing them to safely negate their individual identity and approach Dionysian existential suffering in an Apollonian way. In essence, the tragedy permitted the audience to indirectly experience reality through art, making the truth more bearable.